So for the next few minutes, I won't be able to see chat and anything. So I guess I'll get to any questions. If you have anything, I'll get to it. I expect I'll be done with this. I don't think I'll need the whole 50 minutes for this. This presentation is actually, I usually present this in 2 different sections, and each around 20 minutes. Like, that's how I prepared it. So what I've done today is I've kind of taken elements from both, combined it, and I'm going to talk about all of it today. So yeah, I'm expecting we'll be done quite earlier. So we could have an kind of an interaction later. Even when I'm ending the slide share, I should be able to even get someone in video and audio if someone wants to discuss. So yeah, thanks for being here today. We are going to talk about static analysis for Drupal modules, and I'll be talking about it from different perspectives, during development and with CI, which is, I think it's kind of staple today. So a bit about me. I'm Hussain. I've been in Drupal community since about, I think about 10 years. Drupal.org profile says 12 years, but yeah, like really it's around 10 years since I've started building Drupal sites, and about 5 years since I started contributing in code. Before that it was just meetups and events. And I usually go online as Hussain Web, as you can see on the screen. I tweet there. That's where I'm most active. So if you want to reach out to me, I think that's the best place. You can also find me online on Drupal.org, YouTube as Hussain Web, pretty much, most places. I work as a director of Drupal services at Axelerant. The engineering manager is, you could say that also. It's kind of similar, really. It's just a title. My responsibility is, best practices for how we use Drupal in our agency, in organization. So but this talk is also a kind of a result of the practices that I have learned over there. So since I'm not able to really control, these slides won't really work, because I'm like, my screen is taken up by the slideshow. I just wanted to consider a few of these slides that are going to come up. So you can just take a look at it and see if you can find something wrong with this. I'll just give a couple of seconds over here. Is there something that's obviously wrong over here that you can see? And what about this one? Is there something that's obviously wrong? Forget the ... at the end. That's just so that I could fit it right. But other than that, in the code itself, is there something that's not as per our usual Drupal practices or coding practices? And then consider this, for example. We'll talk about all of this at the end. Since the standard model didn't work here. How about this? And then this, I think this is probably the last one. Yeah, and then this. So really, these are relatively simple snippets, and if you want to review that, it's tiring. It's you can't expect to keep looking at code snippet, code during your day-to-day operations and picking up everything that could possibly go wrong in catching every single mistake that might have been there. So let's just quickly go back and see what kind of mistakes we caught or didn't catch over here. So for example, over here, it's a simple class, but we are using a dynamic property. Now, PHP allows this. It won't be a syntax error, but it could be an error for your application. That this could have a typo, for example. You could have some other property, and this could have been a typo, and PHP would not have told you anything while unless it ran that code, and if you have error reporting turned on. Now there's nothing wrong here from PHP point of view, but in Drupal we're expected to we're expected to wrap this in T function call. So this is more of a Drupal specific thing rather than a PHP specific thing. Now over here, now we do have the T, but again, the Drupal practice is that if you're using a form-based class, you should really be using the method T rather than the global function T. So again, this is something that we should catch. Now again, it's like, yeah, these kind of problems, they may not be a big deal, but again, we aim towards standard practices. We'll talk about that a bit more. Now over here, this code starts getting slightly more complex now, and we don't catch over here that, or I mean, of course, we could have caught, if you just read through this code line by line, you would have caught that in this particular case, $y is not initialized at all. So $x is 100, so it will fail the first condition, and it will pass the second condition. But like, what if in this case $y is defined, it's 400, but in some other case, like suppose $x, if it was less than 50 in a future revision, it would not have entered either of these blocks, and $y would have been undefined, and you would have warning in that particular case. Now this is again something that that's easy to miss, especially form render arrays. They get quite big, so it's very, very easy to miss. But over here we do have two different titles, hash title, array keys. Now PHP of course doesn't complain about it. It just uses the last one silently, and you would see text label. But then of course, if someone is reading the code, which is what we are interested in over here, of course, maintainability, it could get confusing for them. And over here, okay, we are using this global method, again, because we are using form based, we do have a convenient config accessor. We could have just used that, but we are using a global accessor, this \Drupal config. In a way, we are using dependency injection container, but again, we could have been using it better by directly using dependency injection. This config object is available to us already. So like I said, catching this is just a small sample. The day-to-day problems get even more complex, and we do have code reviews. I mean, if you're doing them well enough, great, but that's still tiring. And for something which is very, very simple, very, very straightforward, we should really let computers catch those errors when we can. And that's where static analysis comes. So like I was saying, yeah, of course, you have this code reviews, but again, it's tiring. It applies effort. There is this to and fro between humans, and there is this weight to the feedback, because if a person tells you that your code is wrong, you could take it personally. But if a computer tells it, you're just, you could be frustrated, but you don't take it personally, at least. So let's explore a few kind of issues that we run into, with our code. I kind of classified broadly into these three things: code style issues, logical, and runtime issues. Now, code style issues are not really an issue for computer. It's really for the team. So if you're working, you would want your code to follow a certain standard, certain style, so that your team is not deciding, okay, should it be 2 spaces or 4 spaces? You just use what is defined in the standard, what is in the team style. There is really no right and wrong over here. The important thing is consistency. So this is something that we should not really think about. The system today is that we have a lot of tools that automate this. Of course, such tools are very, very popular in JavaScript in ecosystem. Things like Prettier and everything. But in PHP, we have PHP CS and PHP CBF. So CS actually checks for code style issues, but CBF can fix many of those. At least simple ones like tabs and everything. So we should really let machines worry about that. So that's one style of issues. Then we have logical issues, and again, the logical issues could be either related to code. Some of the examples that we saw, that like edge cases and everything, when certain parts, like for example, certain variables may not be present, or certain properties may not be present, or we are not using the methods we should be using, for example. So these are related to code. But then there are also logical issues related to domain. For example, storing currency as a simple variable, it can never be negative, for example, or it should always be stored as a decimal, not a float. Things like this, these are more related to domain. And then finally we have runtime issues, and runtime issues are just issues that happen during the runtime. Things that are uh, kind of not in your control sometimes, like database going away, or some service not being present, or something surprising, like a dependency not working as it should. So how do we verify this code? There are two broad methods again we can use. So we have static analysis, which we're going to talk about mainly today, and that's great for things like style issues. That's a whole category of tools called linting, which just checks for syntax correctness of the code, and if the code looks okay. And then also, to a certain extent, logical issues related to code, things like all the things that we described in the examples before. And then we have automated testing. This is great for logical issues related to domain. uh, Things like currency can never be negative. Are we verifying that? And runtime issues, to a certain extent, yeah, you can check for surprises. What happens to your site if the database goes down? Is it handled gracefully? Things like that. And there is always an overlap over here. There are the kind of issues you can catch with static analysis and automated testing. uh, there is an overlap. There are some issues which are completely a domain of static analysis, and some which are completely in domain of automated testing. But then there are some which are kind of both. One example is the type system. So for example, talked about currency. Now if we are always using currency as if you're using a particular class that you have, and you're always storing currency as that, you can add validation within your class itself that, okay, current this the amount can never be negative, for example, whatever your domain is. And now these things can be verified by static analysis to a certain extent, right? And then you have automated testing. So there is some overlap over here. And the end goal that we need to worry about is that our code is correct. The code is maintainable, code is correct. That's all we care about. And figure out what are the best tools we have to verify that the code is correct, the correctness of the code. Related to code, let's use static analysis for that. And for the other things, we do have automated testing, PHP unit and all of that. We'll not talk about that in this session. It's just an introduction so far, right? So in static analysis, we have a variety of tools. You might have heard of many of these already. Peer review has been long popular in Drupal, at least. It's basically a wrapper. It calls PHP CS and some of its own checks to verify that a Drupal module looks correct. It's like I said, it's a wrapper for PHP CS. So it's basically a code style check, but it provides certain standards. Actually, the standards are provided by the coder module, but it provides these standards which it uses to verify the correctness. PHP CS I already discussed. PHP MD is it's PHP mess detector, and that checks for various complexity metrics, things like cyclomatic complexity or nth path complexity and stuff like that. PHP Stan, Fan, and SAM. These three tools next. They're actual static analyzers, and what they do is they actually check for the flow issues in code. The kind of issues that we spoke about earlier, that a variable is not declared, for example. Now some of these PHP CS also catches that happens, but PHP Stan can actually verify that the variable is of the correct type. Like for example, if you're calling a method on a class, the parameters are of the correct type and everything. It can verify all of that. Fan and SAM are also very similar tools, and they are all very flexible. I think PHP Stan is very relevant to Drupal, at least, because there are you might have heard of this tool, Drupal Check, written by Matt Glaman. And that's a wrapper on that's actually, I think it's a plugin to PHP Stan, or it's a profile on PHP Stan. I'm forgetting what it's called now. Fan and SAM, I've tried it out. It works, but then I just stick with PHP Stan as much as I can. And then in the JavaScript, we have StyleLint, ESLint. I'm forgetting ESLint has been or is that the latest one? There was another linting tool in JavaScript. I'm forgetting that. Anyway, so PHP CS, like I already said, it's very easy to use. It uses something called sniffs, which define coding style and checks. And there are inbuilt, there are few checks. There are checks for sniffs for PSR2, PSR12 now, right? And these are coding standards which are defined for the PHP community by PHP Fig, right? And Drupal has its own coding standard. So there is a Drupal sniff available. Like I said, it's present in the coder module, right? And peer review kind of wraps it all together. So this is one tool. Like I said, it's peerreview.sh. Yeah, that's a website. So you can directly use the website. You can point it to a Drupal module if it is on drupal.org and use it. But I generally don't bother with it. I just use it. In fact, okay, let me go to that Docker image in the end. Yeah, so peer review is another tool, and like I said, it checks for a few things more. It checks for things like if there is a license.txt. For example, if your module is hosted on drupal.org, the packaging will generate a license.txt, so you should remove it. Things like that. Mess detector. So you can see from the screenshot over here that the kind of things it detects is, there are various rules. In PHP CS, we call them sniffs. PHP MD, we call them rules. They're similar things. It's like a profile of what to check for. And the screenshot that we are seeing, it's checking for things like, is the variable in the correct format, in the correct case. So this particular profile, the rule that I used, it defines that variables should be in camel case, and it's reporting that it isn't. And there are many more. Like I said, for example, you can see this particular line. Is there an annotation thing? Yeah, so this one you can see that it's also telling me that there is a method format which has a cyclomatic complexity of 22. And we have configured the limit to be 10. So if it's more than 10, it'll report it. So things like that. How do I... Excuse me. Yeah. So static analysis tools, like I said, it checks for valid classes, methods. It checks for type check. It checks for if the types are being used correctly, if they are being passed correctly in the parameters to a method, for example, or a function. Those kind of validations. And PHP stan, like I said, there is a config file for Drupal, because these tools, they just don't work with single file. They are static analysis tools. So I should have actually mentioned this before. Static analysis, the name is static because it's not actually running the code. It's just examining the code and making calculations based on what it sees, based on the lines and everything. It builds a representation and checks it for correctness. So that's why it is called static, right? So even though this is static, it still loads a lot of files. So for example, if you want to run PHP stan, you need all the dependencies. You need to have Composer. You need to have run Composer installed before. Whereas for PHP CS, MD, those kind of tools, they just work on one file at a time. If you point it to a single PHP file, it'll just check that, nothing else. Yeah. So excuse me. So now, since our Drupal's autoloader is kind of different, it's not the same composer.json. I mean, yeah, it uses composer.json, but it adds a lot of things on top of it, for module specific stuff. So you need some extra config file to tell PHP stan that, okay, like look for classes over in these locations also. So there are some samples out there. I can point them to you at the end. Right. So how does the type checking is one of the strongest or most used features of a static analysis tool. It's all built around types. That if your variable is assigned a certain type, are you calling correct methods on that, and on those methods are you passing the correct parameters? And you would know that in PHP doc we can specify different parameters. Now we have type hinting itself in PHP 7 onwards. We can specify both. Sorry, the what's the word? The primitive types. Things like bool and string and everything. We can also type hint parameters that way. So it uses that information, but if that's not present, it uses the information from PHP doc. In Drupal style, we specify the types in the comments about the method, right? So it uses that, and so it uses both. So the precedence is given to the comments, because each of these tools, PHP stand, SAM, and all of that, they have their own syntax. So you can, for example, you can actually check that. So for example, in PHP, you might just say that, okay, this parameter should be an array. You can't really specify anything more than that. You can just say it's an array. But in the comments, you can describe that it is an array of integer to string, as in or array of string to string. Like, for example, form array are usually like that. You have a string. You have an dollar form, the element ID, and then that's an array. So you can actually specify that the array should look like, it should have string keys, and it should have arrays. So these PHP stand and all of those things, these tools, they can actually check for these. And iterators, collection. So generics, they support generics as well. So I don't want to go too deep into generics right now. PHP doesn't support generics, by the way. It's a language feature in few of the languages, like Rust and C++, of course. So many languages, they support generics. PHP doesn't. But yeah, it's a useful feature. And if you want to document your methods using generics, you can in PHP doc comments, and these tools can check that for you. Okay, so moving on, how do we use these tools? And again, there are three different ways. Locally, and by locally, I actually mean manually. That whenever you want to check, you just actually run the command, either the PHP stan or PHP CS, and then verify, and then you've checked it. I would recommend doing all the three. Of course, locally we may forget to run something, but you can, for example, have a pre-commit hook, so whenever you're committing it, check for all the changed files, and we'll walk you through that later. So it can check these all of these common checks, PHP, CS, MD, and all of that on whatever files you're about to commit, and then continuous integration, so that there is this last check always happening. Pre-commit hooks, somebody may just pass dash, and which lets you skip pre-commit hooks. So somebody may just pass that, or somebody may just forget, or somebody has not installed those hooks correctly and it never runs. So it's still very, very important for these checks to run in a continuous integration. So locally, like I said, you just install the tools yourself. IDEs provide a lot of these tools. A lot of those things which I mentioned earlier. For example, PHP Storm is quite good at catching many of those things. It'll give you that red underline to indicate that there is something wrong over here, and you can fix it over there. And then use Docker images. I'll walk you through one of these images. Drupal QA, that's an image that I maintain. So it's a plug, but yeah. You can use images like that, which contains all of these tools. So you don't have to install it on your machine. You could just use the Docker image when you want to. And now pre-commit hooks is it's kind of like you can see in the screenshot. Whenever you're about to commit something, it will first run whatever checks you have configured. We'll talk more about this at the end anyway. And it will run through various checks. If any of them fail, it will say, no, sorry, you cannot commit. And there is this, so the screenshot that you see is from Grum PHP, but we have this Drupal specific kind of, customized for Drupal packages already available. One is Vijay CS85, Vijay, sorry, forgetting his full name. So he started maintaining this, and then I adapted it for our own needs, and so both are there. I just updated and released a new version for this yesterday, which uses an updated version of Grum PHP, stable one. Actually, the screenshot is from that. That's why you see the Axelerant logo. But if you use this Vijay CS85, you would see a Drupalicon logo. Right, and this integration. So it's again, like you can have, depending on the CI tool that you're using, the screenshot you're seeing is from our GitLab. Depending on the CI tool you're using, you can split up the checks as you see. So for example, we have Drupal code quality over here, which checks for these kind of things. It checks for very basic things like composer validate, the composer JSON and log file are in sync, for example. And then some of this PHP CS and MD checks, all of that. And then it goes on to run Drupal tests as well. These are automated tests, PHP unit based automated tests. Similarly, we have front end code quality, which is not really which is not what we're talking about, but we are splitting it into different jobs so that we can, it's easier to know which job failed and how do you handle that. And these jobs, they use specific Docker images, again, which I'm going to come to later. So for Drupal code quality, I just use the Drupal QA image I mentioned earlier. And front-end code quality could use the similar node Docker image. So yeah, let's look at the tools, some of the tools themselves, not all of them. So like I already said, Drupal QA is something that I maintain. It's based on another popular PHP QA image, right? And it supports PHP 7.3 and 4. There is also PHP 7.1, but I'm not pushing any new images to that. So you could pull a PHP 7.1 image, it will just be outdated. But 7.2, 3, and 4 are updated regularly. In fact, I just pushed an update today morning. And so it contains all tools from the base image. PHP QA contains a lot of tools like PHP MD, PHP CS. There's a whole list of tools. There are dozens of tools. It contains all of that, of course, because it's based on that. But then it also adds Drupal specific tools like peerreview.sh, sniffs from Drupal Coder, Drupal Check. It gets removed because it's kind of internal how PHP Stan has updated its the plugin system, and Drupal Check has kind of changed their architecture based on that. So it cannot really be packaged this way. But anyway, Matt Glavin's thoughts are that we may not even need a Drupal Check tool anymore. It could just be a different profile. So Drupal Check, it kind of works, but it's an outdated version. The newer versions with the new architecture, that's not in the image. So the way you use this Docker image is you use this very long command, which you can find from the GitHub page. You can just copy paste this command, or you can if you're using it regularly, you alias it. But more typically, we use this from image in CI, and I'll show a CI configuration file using this image. But this is what it looks like in action. That we are using this image. For example, you can see, and all of these tools are present, like Composer Validate. Composer is present already on that. PHP Lint, we're directly using PHP Lint. We're not installing any of those things. It's already present in the Docker image. And so are many other tools which I mentioned. And in terminal also, if you want to run one, if you want to try out a new tool, and if you just want to see how it or not, like for example, I'm trying out PHP Stan over here. So you see the command. Now, I know it's a long command, but it's easily broken up. If you're familiar with Docker, it's not too complicated. I'm basically running this image, and I'm mounting my project. So like the project directory needs to go into the Docker image, right, in the container. So that's what I'm doing over here with this -v and everything. And I'm specifying that, okay, this is the image name, Drupal QA. And I'm running the command. Actually, I think it's clipped off in the screenshot, but it's PHP Stan and the path. So it's running it basically, and it's finding a lot of issues, but which is what I want. I'm trying out, how well PHP Stan finds issues in this particular project, and it has found few things like you can see that parameter $user of method so and so has invalid type hint, so request time not found, things like that. So now some of this could be just configuration error, because they see constant request time not found. I think it's just because it's not loaded the I think request time is in bootstrap.inc. So maybe that's the reason it's not found. But yeah, it's these kind of things that need to be fixed. And then I mentioned the pre-commit tool, Axelerant, Drupal quality checker. VJCS85 Drupal quality checker is also very, very similar. It's based on Grumpy PHP. and it runs dozens of tools on commits, but so Grum PHP does all of that work, so what this package adds, you install this with Composer, by the way, again, I'll show you the GitHub pages shortly. So it comes with defaults for Drupal. That's the real value addition over here. So it's not you don't have to install Grum PHP and then set about configuring it. You install this package and you get defaults for Drupal out of the box immediately. So it is opinionated. It is for Drupal and for Axelerant use. That's why it's in Axelerant namespace. But it's very customizable. You could start with it and you can fork it and create whatever works for you. It is MIT license, I believe. And this is what it looks like in action. Again, I showed a few earlier screenshot, but you can see over here that based on it can do a variety of things. So it has it checks for commit messages, for example. Okay, and it also checks only the files that are actually changed. So you see over here that it's not running any of these other tasks, because in this commit I'm only changing one file, one configuration file, and it's running it through JSON lint. That's it. It's not running anything else. But now if you had changed, for example, if you had changed your module code, PHP related tasks would have run as well. So I think then you have more complex tools, like this PHP Metrics. It builds a nice dashboard. It gives you a whole dashboard, HTML dashboard, which gives you a summary of your entire code base, whatever you have passed it. So over here it tells me like how many classes it found over here, how many lines of code, cyclomatic complexity per class, things like that, and again I'll show the actual report to you in a minute. So how do you get started with this? One of these things that I strongly recommend is that use templates, because it's not easy to, whenever you're starting out a new project, it's not easy to remember that, I have to do this as well and I have to get this configuration file as well. It takes time. So use starter kits, use templates, and for that purpose I have this tool called AXL template. Again, it's kind of internal, that's why name AXL, but it is open source, so feel free to fork. You can use it outright. There's no reason you can't use it, but again, if you want to fork it, it's there. But the only thing is it's written in Python, so you install it with something called pip, which is kind of like Composer for Python world. So you install it with pip, and then you run it with init Drupal. And let's see if I can run a demo. The problem is, that init Drupal runs Composer, which gets very slow on screen share. So let's see. I'm using Composer 2, by the way. That's a different topic altogether. Composer 1, I wouldn't even consider it, but Composer 2, I can at least give it a shot. All right, so I think that's the end of it. I'll just close on a summary before I start the demos, whatever works. So important things that you should remember: static analysis checks for code, correctness of code without running it. It's not a substitute for automated testing. It's a different thing. It's not like, okay, you have great automated testing, so you don't need to do static analysis. You're wasting your time that way. Or if you're running a whole suite of static analysis and you don't need automated testing, it doesn't work that way. And run the checks at multiple levels. CI is a must; it should always run, but then also run it pre-commit so that people have faster feedback. It's not like they push the code and then CI tells them that, it's like you accidentally typed a tab instead of a space. It's a waste of time. So run checks in multiple levels. That's it for the slide deck, and I can have like 13 left. Oops. So I'll just go through this, what some of these tools look like. This is the, like let me, before I run this, I think I'll take run this on, as in like somebody wants to see it. But yeah, okay, let me walk you through this links. I'll paste these links in the chat later. Yeah, so this is the Drupal quality checker. The installation instruction is well documented. This is how you use it. You follow, like, to use this instructions. You need to do a little. Installing this is It's not as simple as Composer require. I mean, yeah, you can do that, but then you'll have to copy the files manually. But if you're using Drupal core Composer scaffold, you just need to add a small section in your composer.json, which lets it, which allows files from Drupal quality checker. I'm actually thinking of changing this logic, so it may not be true a few days later because there are some issues doing it this way, and then all of these installation steps are confusing. So I'm thinking of making it simple, and eventually you just need to run composer required -dev, the package name, and yeah, the manual installation is you run this command and then copy all these files from the library to project root. This way, the command is all here, and there are a few more steps in documentation. Like for example, if you want to remove the excuse me, if you want to remove the commit banner, you don't like it, you can remove it if you want. Commit message, if you want to ensure that the commit message is certain format, things like that. You can, I'll paste the link. And Drupal QA, similarly, it's the documentation is over here. So I'll paste the link, and the command if you need to run it with is also over here. And yeah, I think I have, yeah, so this is what PHP Metrics, I just ran it a few minutes before. My experience with screen sharing is that it slows down everything, so I just ran it before. So yeah, it's the same thing that you saw in screenshot, by the way, and it gives you this various reports, like, okay, for example, Composer, what kind of dependencies that you have, so it tells me that this package should be updated, for example. There's most of the things. I mean, see, this is information. It doesn't mean that there is an action item. Now, there is a reason why most of these packages be updated. For example, all of these things, okay, now this should be updated, and I thought that's weird. But yeah, some of them can't be updated because Drupal dependencies are locked that way, So yeah, really have to learn to filter that. Okay, fine, that these kind of packages, doctrine/common. Yeah, you should look at this, but then you should know whether to work with it. Whereas, and honestly, Drupal available updates page also tells this, in a more relevant way. But this information is there. Then you have cyclomatic, like for example, cyclomatic complexity. It tells for each class different metrics. And again, you really shouldn't get bogged down by all the metrics. Aim for something. If something looks really bad, yeah, so cyclomatic complexity 4.58, not that bad. So okay, yeah, this is some kind of bug. I think it's average bugs per class. So these are different metrics, different mathematical calculations. So these are useful measures. And I think what you can worry about is the trends. So for example, it's saying compared to the last run, it's increased 0.87, and I think that is something that you should worry about. Okay, that what are the, like, for each run, what's the, now these numbers are not valid over here because I ran them on different code bases. So I first ran it on a contrib module, like on a specific module, and then I ran it on the whole directory. So these values are not it tells of like lines of code and different metrics related to lines of code, bugs per class. So again, this is a lot of different reports that you have over here. Now this tool comes with a Drupal QA, and that is not documented, but looks something like this. Over here, I'm running it through Drupal QA, and the command is simply PHP Metrics report HTML, and it's all documented. So if you go to phpmetrics.org, yeah, that's how you run the command. And because I'm running it in Docker, I just added the whole Docker command before that. Docker run the image name and everything.